4 years ago, when I was 16, my best friend Marcus and I had a ritual. Every evening at 10:30 sharp, we'd meet at the corner of Elm and walk the familiar route through our sleepy town down Main Street, past the shuttered diner, over the old railway bridge, and back through Riverside Park. It was our sacred time, a pocket of freedom where we could shed the suffocating weight of high school expectations and just exist. The bridge was nothing special, 30 feet of weathered concrete spanning the abandoned Norfolk Southern tracks. During the day, it buzzed with the ordinary rhythm of small-town life: joggers, dog walkers, teenagers on bikes. The streetlights hummed their electric lullabies, and we'd crossed it hundreds of times without a second thought. But that night in late July was different from the moment we stepped onto the pavement. The air felt thick, almost viscous, like walking through invisible honey. Marcus noticed it too. I caught him running his fingers through his hair, the way he did when something felt off. We were halfway across, when the streetlight directly overhead began to strobe. Not the gentle flicker of a dying bulb, but violent, aggressive pulses that painted our faces in stark white and deep black. Then it died. The sudden darkness was absolute in that small circle, while the other lights maintained their steady glow. Marcus grabbed my arm. "Dude, that's..." The scream cut him off. It rose from the darkness below like a wounded banshee, starting low and human before climbing to frequencies that made my teeth ache. But it wasn't quite human. There was something fundamentally wrong with it, like a damaged recording played backwards. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the concrete pillars and metal rails, bouncing back at us in layers until I couldn't tell where it began or ended. My skin crawled as if insects were marching beneath the surface. Every instinct I'd inherited from 1,000 generations of prey animals screamed at me to run, but my feet had grown roots. Marcus was statue, still beside me, his breathing shallow and quick. The scream faded to a wet, rattling whisper that seemed to linger in the spaces between my ribs. Then came the scratching. Metal against metal, deliberate and rhythmic, like massive claws dragging across the steel rails below. The sound moved east to west, then back again, as if something large was pacing in the darkness beneath us, waiting. "We need to go," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "We need to go right fucking now." But as we turned to flee, I made the mistake of looking back. In the shadow beneath the bridge, something moved. Not the quick dart of an animal or the shamble of a homeless person, but something that flowed like liquid shadow given form. For just a moment I thought I saw eyes, too many eyes, reflecting the distant streetlights like scattered stars. We ran. I don't remember my feet touching the ground. We sprinted through the humid night air, past the park, through downtown, not stopping until we reached the harsh fluorescent sanctuary of the 24-hour sheets on Route 9. We stood there panting under those merciless lights, surrounded by the mundane comfort of Slurpee machines and lottery tickets, trying to convince ourselves we'd imagined it all. The next morning, I scoured every local news source, every social media group, every police scanner app. Nothing. Our town of 8,000 people couldn't keep a secret about a stolen garden gnome, but whatever we'd encountered left no trace in the digital world. Except for one thing. 3 days later, the local paper ran a tiny item buried on page 6. Railway bridge, closed for safety inspection following structural damage. The article mentioned unusual stress patterns and metal fatigue inconsistent with normal wear. Marcus and I never talked about what we'd seen that night. We didn't need to. Some experiences carve themselves so deep into your bones that words become inadequate, almost insulting. But sometimes, late at night, when sleep won't come, I'll catch myself listening for that wet, impossible scream. The bridge reopened 2 weeks later. We found a new route for our evening walks. When I was 11, sleep came easy. The fears that plagued children, monsters under beds, shadows in closets, had never touched me. I slept deeply and peacefully, my bedroom door always open to the hallway. My parents said it was because I'd been a good sleeper since infancy, but the truth was simpler. The darkness didn't scare me because I'd never been given a reason to fear it. That changed on a Tuesday night in October. I woke without reason, pulled from dreamless sleep by some primitive alarm system I didn't know I possessed. The digital clock cast its green glow, 3:17 a.m. Outside my window, Bare October branches scratched against the glass like skeletal fingers, but that wasn't what had woken me. It was the feeling of being watched. I turned toward my open doorway, and my blood crystallized in my veins. A child sat in the hallway just beyond my threshold, perched in a perfect crouch like a gargoyle. At first glance, it looked like my younger brother Tommy, the same slight build, the same bowl cut our mother insisted on. But as my eyes adjusted, the wrongness became impossible to ignore. The child's skin held a blue luminescence, not the pale blue of poor circulation or cold, but the deep, otherworldly blue of deep ocean water. It seemed to emanate from within, casting no light but somehow visible in the darkness. And the eyes, God, the eyes were enormous black pools that reflected the faint light from my window like polished obsidian. But here was the strangest part. I wasn't afraid. I should have been terrified, should have screamed for my parents, should have pulled my covers over my head and prayed for morning. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as if I were looking at something I'd been expecting my entire life. The blue child raised one small hand and began to wave. It was a slow, deliberate gesture, each movement precise and ceremonial. The wave went on for what felt like minutes, and throughout it all, those impossible eyes never left mine. I found myself waving back, my hand moving of its own accord. That's when I understood. This wasn't a dream or hallucination. This was a meeting. The child's mouth opened, and I expected sound words, screams, something. Instead, images flooded my mind. Vast spaces between stars, doorways that led to impossible geometries, the thin places where our world brushed against others. I saw myself sleeping peacefully while creatures of shadow and light passed through our home like tourists in a museum, observing but never touching. I saw that I was special, that I could see them when others couldn't, that this was both a gift and a burden I'd carry for the rest of my life. The blue child stopped waving and pressed one finger to its lips in a universal gesture of silence. Then it smiled, not the innocent smile of a child, but something ancient and knowing that had simply chosen to wear a young face. When I blinked, it was gone. I lay awake until dawn, processing what I'd experienced. Every detail remained crystal clear, burned into my memory with supernatural precision. When morning came, I found wet footprints in the hallway, small, child-sized prints that led from my bedroom door to the bathroom and back again, before disappearing entirely. I checked on Tommy. He was sound asleep in his room, his feet dry, his pajamas unchanged from the night before. That was 15 years ago. I've never seen the blue child again, but I've learned to recognize the signs of the others, the peripheral shadows that move wrong, the reflections that lag behind their sources, the temperature drops that follow no earthly logic. They're always there, just beyond the edge of vision, waiting patiently for the next person who can truly see. I sleep with my door closed now. Not because I'm afraid, but because some meetings are meant to be private. The snow fell thick that February weekend in 1994, transforming the Virginia countryside into something from a fairy tale. At 15, I was spending a long weekend with my best friend David at his family's farmhouse, and the unexpected snowfall was a gift. It meant four-wheelers and adventure, maybe even a day off school if we were lucky. David's house sat on the edge of town, bordered by a soybean field that stretched toward a wall of old-growth forest. We'd explored those woods countless times, discovering the rusted hulks of abandoned cars and mysterious pieces of industrial equipment that time and weather had slowly reclaimed. To teenage boys, it was better than buried treasure. After tearing up the snow-covered field on the ATVs, we parked at the forest's edge and headed in on foot. The snow crunched beneath our boots, and our breath formed small clouds in the cold air. Everything felt muffled, peaceful, as if the world had wrapped itself in cotton. "Let's build that fort we talked about," David said, pointing toward a small clearing where we'd found an old tractor chassis the previous summer. "Now that we've got time." I'd brought my camping hatchet, a Christmas gift I'd been dying to put to proper use. While David gathered fallen branches, I set about felling a young maple for the fort's main support beam. The repetitive thunk of steel biting into wood created a steady rhythm that echoed through the quiet forest. After 20 minutes of work, I needed more wood of the right size. I left David securing our initial framework and wandered deeper into the trees, following a game trail that wound between the massive oaks and hickories. That's when I found the deer. It lay in a small clearing, its body partially hidden by a fallen log. At first, I thought it had been hit by a car and wandered here to die, not uncommon in rural Virginia. But as I approached, the wrongness became apparent. The deer had been opened from throat to belly with surgical precision, not torn apart by scavengers or mauled by a predator, but carved with deliberate intent. The cuts were too clean, too purposeful. Worse, the entire inside of the carcass had been hollowed out with the same meticulous care, leaving only skin, bones, and sinew behind. And there were marks in the snow around it. Not paw prints or hoof prints, but impressions that looked disturbingly like human handprints if human hands had fingers twice as long as they should be. I called for David, and he came crashing through the underbrush, branches catching on his coat. When he saw the deer, his face went pale. "Jesus," he whispered. "What could do that?" Before I could answer, movement caught my eye. About 50 yards deeper into the woods, a figure stood between two large oaks. At that distance, it should have been clear a hunter maybe, or another kid from town. Instead, it appeared as a dark silhouette with blurred edges, like someone had taken a photograph and smudged it while the ink was still wet. "Hey!" I called out, more from instinct than thought. The figure moved. It didn't walk or run, it flowed from one tree to another with liquid grace, never fully disappearing but never coming into focus. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up as something deep in my brain began screaming warnings. "David," I said quietly, never taking my eyes off the woods. "We need to go. Now." He must have heard something in my voice, because he didn't argue. As we turned to leave, I caught another glimpse of the figure closer now, maybe 30 yards away. Still indistinct, but I could make out what might have been a face turned in our direction. We started walking quickly toward the field, but the sensation of being watched grew stronger with each step. When I looked back, the figure was following us, moving from tree to tree with that same unnatural fluidity. "Run," I whispered. We bolted. I've never moved so fast in my life. Branches whipped at our faces and snow flew up around our feet as we crashed through the undergrowth. Behind us, I could hear something else moving through the forest. Not quite footsteps, more like the sound of wind, given weight and purpose. David veered left toward a different path, and for a moment we were separated. In that instant of solitude, I heard it clearly, a sound like industrial machinery grinding to life, metal against metal, coming from somewhere behind us in the trees. When we reached the field, we were both gasping and shaking. David stood bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. "You saw it too?" I asked. He nodded without looking up. What the hell was that thing? Neither of us had an answer. That evening, we told David's grandmother about our experience. She was in her 80s, born and raised in the area, and if anyone would know about local legends or stories, it would be her. Her face grew serious as we described what we'd seen. "That would be near the old Hartley Mill," she said quietly. "There was an accident there in 1952. Boiler explosion. Killed 17 men instantly and trapped 6 more under the debris. They never did find all the bodies." She paused, looking out her window toward the distant tree line. "Folks say the ones they never found are still working their shift, still trapped in that moment when the world went wrong. Most people know to stay away from those woods, especially in winter when the veil between worlds grows thin. We never went back to those woods. My hatchet is still there, buried under decades of fallen leaves and new growth. Sometimes when I drive past that stretch of forest on visits home, I think I can see movement between the trees, dark figures still going about their endless work, trapped forever in the mill's last shift. The deer we found that day wasn't killed by any earthly predator. It was prepared, hollowed out, made ready for something that needed a vessel to carry it between the world of the dead and the world of the living. I understand now why the town's older residents warn their children about those woods. Some places are marked by tragedy so profound that time itself becomes wounded, leaving gaps where the past bleeds through into the present. The mill may be gone, but the workers remain, forever punching a clock that stopped ticking 70 years ago. And sometimes, they notice when the living intrude on their eternal shift,